Masechta Zevachim Daf Ches Amud Aleph. We're starting from Zayin Amud Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. So after the Gemara yesterday gave the makar for Shina Kedis, we shouldn't buy them by Pesach, Akam Pesach, aside for that it's a mitzvah to have in mind for the buy them or for the sake of this carbon that you separated, and say if you didn't have in mind for them, it's going to be puzzle. So the Gemara wants to now talk about a couple chatas, which is also together with a Pesach. Chatas v'nalam. How do we know that by chatas it's a mitzvah to shech l'shem for the chatas that you separated, and also for the shem for the vayim? And how do we know if it was shech l'shem it's going to be puzzle? And the Gemara it says in the pasuk was shachat oisach lechatas. Mashma that the shetehei shchita l'shem chatas, that the shchita of that carbon has to be l'shem for that carbon that you separated. In fact, you found that shchita that has to be l'shma kabbalah v'nayim. From where do we know also the kabbalah sadam has to be done l'shma? And it says in the pasuk ve'lokach hakoyin medan hachatas. And the kohen will take from the blood, which is the shetehei, the taking of the blood, which is the avodah of kabbalah sadam hachatas, has to be l'shem chatas for the sake of the chatas. So you might have ashkeron shchita ve'kabbalah. You talk it found shchita ve'kabbalah that it has to be l'shem chatas zrika v'nolam. From where do we know that the zika, the spraying of the blood, has to be done l'shma? But the Gemara the chapa amakra says in the pasuk the chiper olav hakoyin machatase, which the ishetehei kapara, the kapara which is the ikar, has to be l'shem chatas. So the Gemara ashkeron shchita kodesh. We only found that it's a mitzvah to have in mind when you separate a chatas, that it should have in mind specifically for that chatas and not for any other carbon. How about shina b'aylam nala? How do we know that it's a mitzvah when you shech the carbon? You have to have in mind for the sake of the owner, specifically of this owner who separated the chatas, not for another other person. And when you want to have a because it says in the pasuk Allah. And we have said that when it says Allah, it tells us only on the bala carbon, but not on his friend. So you want to ask on the mitzvah. Over here we found that it has to be la mitzvah, that it's a mitzvah to have in mind for this specific owner who's separated. How do we know that if he didn't have in mind, if it was Shalei Lishma, it's going to be puzzle? And you want to be Rav Huna ben Yeshua, like Rav Huna ben Yeshua said in the Gei Achatas, that a Nazir is makif at the end of his Naziris. The Torah writes, says a chatos soy with above. Chatos, and instead the Torah could have written chatos, instead what did the Torah write? Chatos soy. What above? The teachers, that above is teaching us that the chatos Nazir is only kosher if he was makif l'shem oisei Nazir, from that Nazir itself. Achanami, so too by the regular chatos, it says, v'chipra Allah b'koyin mechatos, but it doesn't say chatos. It says chatos say what above to teach us that all chatos are going to be possible if he didn't have in mind l'shem the bayil. Says Gemara Ashkelon mitzvah b'shinei kodesh. We find because that it's a mitzvah to do all the avodas of a chatos l'shem chatos and not l'shem karmacha, and also uzika b'shinei baylim. And we also have that the zika has to be specifically for the owner. Side for that it's a mitzvah he has to have in mind when he's spraying the blood for the specific owner who separated the carbon, and side la'akif if he had in mind for a different person will be puzzle. But how about that it's going to be puzzle? The chat is going to be puzzle if he did one of the other avodas l'shem a different carbon. And it was shar avodas b'shinei bailim, and by all the other avodas, when he had in mind for a different person, not the owner, bein lamitzvah bein la'akev. I don't even know it's a mitzvah he has to have in mind specifically for the bailim of that carbon. And how do we know that if he doesn't have in mind, it's going to be puzzle? We only know zrika. How do we know? What about all the other kabbanis? Rabbi Yehuda answered, "As mechates nazir." We learn it out from chates nazir. L'chsiv, tzvit by chates nazir v'hika akin of the Hashem. Says chatas v'yasei. It says that the kohen should be maked before Hashem, and he should do his chat, his oila. It's mashma she'yikol asiyos. All the avodas of the carbon, asiyos of the us is telling you all the avodas of the carbon has to be l'shem chatos. He has to have mind specifically for when he does any of the avodas l'shem chatos. So the mitzvah is written already by other chatois. So this pasuk is already extra because we already know that. So what is this extra pasuk coming to tell us that all the avodas has to be for the mitzvah? For the mitzvah, I already know from the previous psukim. So he says this pasuk is coming to teach us that it's going to be possible that if he did one of the avodas l'shem kamach, it's going to be possible. So you've found Menegeh to Shina Kodesh that he had in mind this coming for another carbon. And by all the avodas, it's going to be possible. Shina b'olam and olam. But what do we know if he had in mind for a person other than the owner, except for Zika, that is a mitzvah to have in mind by all the other avodas for the owner, specifically for the owner? And how do we know if he didn't that it's going to be possible? In that passage where it talks about Chatas Nazir, the Torah could have written him Asas HaChatos, and instead of wrote Chatos with an extra vav. That comes to teach us that all the avodas of the Chatos has to be l'shem for specifically that Nazir. Maskal Ravina, so Ravina has the kasha, let me add 1 minute. So once we know by Nazir, so we already know by all Chatas, which is similar. And from the Hekesh we learn out, just like by Shlamim. If you remember, we had that pasuk with all the Kabbalahs, and he ends off with Shlamim to teach us, just like by Shlamim, he doesn't differentiate between the avodas, the mitzvah of Shinui Bailim, the mitzvah that it's a mitzvah to have a mind specifically for that specific owner. All the avodas, it's mitzvah to do l'shem Bailim. That's where we learn out from Shlomo that they didn't differentiate. So too by Chatas, any Chatas, we're not going to be mechalik between the avodas when it comes to Ikuv b'Shina Habaylim. Since we already learned Shina Habaylim by Zrika is me'akiv by a Chatas, it makes the Chatas possible if he didn't have in mind by the Zrika specifically for the owner. So, and once we know Zrika, we already know from Shlomo we're not mechalik between one Aveda and the other Avedas, so we know for all the other Avedas that for the mitzvah and also that if he doesn't follow l'shem the owner, that it's going to be possible also. Sai b'shinei kodesh and sai b'shinei bayim. So the Gemara Maskal Ravina has the kasha l'mayata only now. Oilasei might Rash debate. It says oilasei with a vav, and we said with the vav yidashin. So what do we dashin by oilasei? We know we're not. So if we're not that, we don't dashin the vav of oilasei. How do we know to dashin the vav of chatosei? Well, Avina, according to Avina, that he had a kasha about the vav of oilasei. So the Gemara goes off on a side note. By the mincha and the Zevachim, they're also, that's brought together with the aisle of the Nazir. It says, "V'as hakoyin es minchas soy v'es niskoi." There is also minchas minchasei nesach niskoi. There you have the vav by mincha, the extra vav, and by nesach it says niskoi with a vav. What did you dash over there with the extra vav of mincha and niskoi? So that vav we need it for a different drasha, like we learn out from minchasam and niskei, that it says many times by the Kabbalahs of Chag HaSukkos minchasam and niskei. That one time it's to teach us that even if Balayla, if it was brought, the mincha and the nesachim were brought by night after the akravas hakarbim, that it's still going to be kosher. And then it says minchas v'niskei the second time to teach us that filu lemacha, even if he brought it the next day, it's still going to be kosher. So he says so too by the El HaNazir, the vavim, the extra vavim are come to teach us that he can bring the mincha and nesachim even after it's man. Even though he brings it separately, nevertheless it's going to be considered as the mincha, the nesach of the Ayla Nazir. So we go back to the original kasha. So we know the vav over there was used. What did they dash with the extra vav? Even more, is it possible to learn the regular chatos from a chatos nazir? That you can say, okay, so that's gonna, so now it's extra because they're really the same thing, and being that it's extra, you learn out that it's ma'akiv, that if he had a mind for the wrong bailin, not for the bailin, that it's going to be puzzle. How do you know that you can learn out that the exact same thing and one pasuk is extra? Chatas chelim and chatas nazir like gamra. The din of a regular chatas, we don't learn out from a chatas nazir. Why not? Shekein yesh ima damanach chelim, because together with the chatas nazir, there's also the additional karbanis like the oila and the shlamim. So since there's additional karbanis, it's more chashuv than a regular chatas. So this chumrah is dafke by chatas nazir. But lav dafke, you're going to say it's applicable by chatas, a regular chatas. A chatas nazir, a chatas chelev, loy gamra. And we cannot learn out chatas nazir. You're going to want to learn out from chatas chelev. No, you cannot learn out dinei chatos of nazir from chatas gila shekain, because a regular chatas comes to be mechaper on chatoim chamurim, like kares. The chatas of a nazir is not coming to forgive on such severe avedes. Even a nazir that was neat melameis, he doesn't get kares. Of course, if it's a nazir Torah, he's not going to get kares. So the chatas nazir is much lighter than a regular chatas, so therefore you can't learn it out. Allah Rava says the psul of chatas that was sacrificed shalei l'shma, asher we learn out mechatas mitzera. But mechatas mitzera, the Chassidus it says v'asa akeinos achatas. From this pasuk, when it says v'asa, teaches us sheyahoi kol asher yosef, that all his avodas should be l'shem chatas. Since we already learned out from another mitzvah, from another pasuk that it's a mitzvah to be makev achatz l'shem the chatas and not any other carbon. So the chatas mitzvah is extra. So he's come to tell us that if he had the wrong, if it was shlei l'shma, it's going to be ma'akiv, meaning it's going to be possible if he had a mind for a different carbon. Says Yomar Ashkosh Kodesh. So Taki found the Kodesh to learn how it's a mitzvah to do all the avodas of chatas l'shem chatas, and if he did it in the shem another carbon, it's going to be psula. Shina be'olam and. How do we know that there's a din if he had a mind for the not for the owner? That it's also aside from zikra. How do we know that it's a mitzvah that he has to have in mind by all the other avodas specifically for the owner, and that's a mitzvah? And also, if he didn't, it's going to be possible. Aside from zikra, which we already learned out, but all the other avodas, from where do we know? Because in the Hemshech of the pasuk it says by chatzis mitzvah v'chipa al hamitayir. So we learn out that he has to be marked to come amanas al mitayir al hamitayir zeh on this owner, and not on his friends. So since this pasuk is dealing with all the avodas of a carbon, so we can learn out that all the avodas have to be done l'shem bailam. So the Gemara goes back and asks, like he asked early on Avuna b'nei Yeshua, could we learn out chatas chelev from chatas mitzvah? Chatas chelev and chatas mitzvah le'yalfa. Chatas chelev you cannot learn out from chatas mitzvah. Shekein yeshim adam chelev, because chatas mitzvah has a ashem and a oila that's sacrificed with it, versus a regular chatas doesn't. Chatas mitzvah and chatas chelev like gamra, and then chatas mitzvah we cannot learn out from chatas chelev, because a regular chatas b'meizid is kares, so it has a chumrah. Chatas chelev is coming to forgive on a very severe sin, and versus chatas mitzvah is not dealing with such a severe sin, so we can't learn it out. Says maybe maybe each one cannot be learned out singularly from the other. But maybe we can learn out one from two. In fact, which one out of the three did the Torah not have to write that you need lishma? If you'll say the Torah didn't have to write, you need the din of lishma by chatas chelev. And we could have learned it out from chatas nazir and chatas mitzvah. Says Gemara, that's impossible. Malahanach chatas nazir and mitzvah shekein yesh imam damim acherim. Those two, mitzvah and nazir, have a oila have different kabbalas that are brought with them. Therefore, it's more cheshiva than a regular chatas chaylev. And are you going to say loylich le'achmana b'chatas nazir? If you're going to say, okay, let the Torah not write, you need the din l'shma by chatas nazir with teis mehanach, and we could have learned it out from chatas chaylev b'chatas mitzera. Says, you want to know ma lahanach chatas chaylev b'chatas mitzera? The Torah was more machmir because there shekein ein lam sheila. They cannot go to a chacham and be ma'aker and uproot the chiyuv chatas. Mashenkim and nazir, he can go and be marshal his neder. Nazirus is like any other neder, and just like any neder, a person can go to Talmud Chacham to uproot his neder. So to here, so it's more lenient. You're going to say loylich le'achmana b'chatas mitzera. You're going to say let the Torah not write that you need the din l'shma by chatas mitzera, but teis v'hanech. And we should learn it out from Chatas Chaylev and Chatas Nazir. So I'll tell you, Malahanach, just like by these two, the Torah was more machmir shekain ein by medalas. There you don't have the level, the different levels. Like a ani can bring a cheaper carbon than an usher. Only everybody brings the same carbon. Mashenka by Metzera, if it's an usher, he brings a kivsa, shapsla lachatas. Ani brings a turtle dove or a pigeon. Or if he's a dalim, he can bring a mincha sailus. So there's a kula when it comes to a chatas mitzera. Ella, the makar is the din on the shema is ma'akim bechatas. It's from this the Amakra. It says in the pasuk in Vayikra per example pasuk Lam Zayin. He mentions all the kabbanis. Ikisha kasuv, and he ends up with shlamim to tell you. The Torah is comparing chatas l'shlamim. Ma shlamim, just like shlam ben shina kaddish ben shina be'alam b'ina l'shma the mitzvah. Just like by shlamim, side by kaddish, you have to have in mind specifically for what you separated the carbon for. If it's a chatas, he has to have in mind for a chatas and not a oila. And side shina be'alam, he has to have in mind specifically for the owners of this carbon. That's a mitzvah. That's what we learn out from shlamim. Av chatas ben shina kaddish ben shina be'alam b'ina l'shma the mitzvah. So we learn out from Shlamim by Chatas you have to have, there's the mitzvah that you have to have in mind specifically for that carbon or for that ba'ilim. Hilkach mitzvah, the mitzvah of doing the mitzvah of Chatas Lishma, we learn out from Shlamim. We compare with Shlamim. Hanech Karai La'akiv. Now all these previous psukim that we brought before for mitzvah, now we'll say we don't need it because for mitzvah we already know from Shlamim. So what is the extra psukim that we used before for mitzvah? We're going to use it la'akiv to tell you that if you didn't have a mind, it's going to be puzzle. Since we find by Machshavas Shinui Bailan, it's Paiselas Bezika. By Shinui Bailan, we find that it's puzzles by Zika if he doesn't have a mind for the specific owner. So therefore, it's going to puzzle also by other Avedas, just like by Shlamim. We said this, if once you know one Aveda is Asur, and pasel, or it's kosher, or whatever it is, we learn out all the other avodas from it. That'll say here. Zog the Gemara, Ashkan chatas chaylev. We find chatas chaylev. The chsibei v'shachat lechatas, and it says that he should tzachlit for chatas. From this that we dash, we have to shech l'shem chatas.